Hey everybody, it's Naya. Welcome back to Naya Reads and Smiles. Okay, so today I'm going to be doing my 2019 favorites video. I've pushed it as far as I can push it. I've just been putting off this video the entire week because I kept rearranging my list and I just couldn't figure out, one, how many books I wanted on the list, and two, just what order to put them in. So I just decided, you know what, these aren't going to be in any particular order. It's just all of my favorite books from this year. So yes, get some popcorn and get some snacks because we're going to be talking about all the books, and I am just I'm ready for this emotional ride. If you're ready, let's do this together. Before I officially start my list of 10 books, I'm gonna give a mention to a book series that I decided not to put on here because I'm still reading the second book. I read the Diviner series this year and it was fantastic, and it's a book that came out a while ago. I just didn't read it until recently, and then now I'm on the second book and just like banging my head against the wall and wondering why I just left it on my TBR shelf for so long. The Diviner is by Libba. It takes place in the 1920s. There's ghosts, there's psychics, there's people with powers, and it's fantastic. Okay, the first book I am gonna talk about. This is the first time I am talking about this book. This is the last book I read, and I was gonna do a whole video dedicated to it. Then I decided, you know what, I'm gonna put it on my favorites list and just talk about it first because I am so mind blown and I'm still processing the book, even though it's been about a week and a half since I finished it. I haven't been able to read anything since I finished this book. Book number 1 on my 2019 favorites is The Great Alone by Kristin. I know, you guys are like, where did this book come from? When did you read it? How come you never talked about it? And I'm talking about it now, okay? When I tell you I experienced a full range of emotions when I read this book, I cried, I laughed, I cried some more, I threw it against the wall, I picked the book back up, I cried some more. Like there was mainly crying, but there was also like happy crying too, so it wasn't just sad crying, it was just like a full range of emotional crying. The book takes place in 1974 and we're following a family of 3. We're following a father who is a Vietnam War veteran. Not only that, he was a POW, so he was a prisoner of war. He was tortured. He left to war when he was very young and he came back 6 years later completely changed and with severe PTSD. His PTSD in this book makes him very violent. I also want to put a trigger warning out there for domestic abuse. I feel like it's so accurately depicted PTSD, especially the effect that untreated PTSD can have not only on someone but the people around them. I'm not gonna cry because I'm thinking of all this stuff that happened in the book. Okay, we're getting through the synopsis. Okay, Naya, focus. That is the father in this book. We have the mother who she is absolutely in love with the father. She is at the receiving end of the domestic abuse. And then we have our main character, the perspective we're following, who is the daughter of the parents, Lenny. We follow Lenny from the age of about like 10, 11, all the way into her adulthood, so it spans her entire lifetime. Dad in this book ends up getting a letter from the father of one of his friends that died in the Vietnam War, who was really close to him. His friend left him all of his land in Alaska. There's no electricity, there's no running water, you have to do everything yourself. They move in the summer and winter starts approaching and they know nothing about surviving winter. Again, no electricity. They have to can and store and preserve food. It is basically like the 18th and 19th century, you know, they have to do it, like they will die out there if they don't figure it out. We're following this really toxic family, and we're following it through the eyes of the child in the family, and it is so, oh my god, it's so hard to read at sometimes, but it's so beautiful to read at other times. And the main plot of this book is these characters that are sort of preparing for winter in Alaska. Throughout the book, and as Lenny grows up and gets older, one of the things you see is that the father's violence gets worse and worse. So there's this fear of like, oh my god, he's gonna do something. What makes this book so beautiful is our main character, Lenny. We follow her not only, you know, having to live in this toxic situation and having all these fears. She has this amazing friendship in the book, which is one of my favorite things about this whole book, is we follow this friendship that goes from childhood all the way into adulthood. It like builds, like once you get to the second half of the book, I could not put it down, you guys. Like when I say I was worried. Like Lenny, I felt like she was my best friend and I was watching her live her life. It is so raw and so real. Alaska isn't just a place that these characters are living in. It's like the villain of the story as well as the hero of the story. You know, it's the wilderness, and there are animals that will kill you, the weather will kill you. It tackles so much and it's so beautiful, and I cried so many times. I feel like I'm not doing it justice describing it. The next book on my list I feel like is on everyone's list this year. If you've read it, this book is hard not to love. Next book I have here is Circe by Madeline Miller, and you guys, I did a whole video on this. You know, this book was an entire experience reading. Circe is the daughter of the sun god as well as a river naiad, and so when she was born she was expected to have a lot of power and to be very beautiful and to basically be a Greek goddess, but when she was born she looked very human, no power whatsoever, and everyone just makes fun of her and teases her and puts her down, and she is just told over and over again that she's basically nothing. She discovers that she can take things from the earth and make magic and cast spells, and basically she discovers she has this witch / sorceress powers. Once she discovers this, she becomes one of the most powerful goddesses, and this is the entire story about everything that happened in her life and how she went from that to being someone who's feared in the Greek pantheon. She writes in a way that is so beautiful and lyrical. It was fantastic. Okay, the next book on my list is a young adult contemporary book. I think out of all the years that I've done like favorites videos, I don't think I've ever had so many contemporary books, because you guys know that's not my like normal genre. Jackpot by Nic Stone. Oh my god. Okay, first things first, this book was one of the first contemporary books where I was able to perfectly imagine myself as the main character, because like the main character of this book is mixed, I'm mixed, and it's just like our hair, she has a mole on her face, everything was identical. This book was such a fun, just like a fun contemporary book. In this book we're following our main character Rico Danger, and she works at a gas station, and it is Christmas Eve or New Year's Eve or one of the two holidays. She ends up selling 2 lottery tickets to 2 different people that evening. The next day it is announced that there are actually 2 lottery winners for that like $1 million ticket. One of the winning tickets is one that she sold that night. The person that has the second winning ticket hasn't claimed it yet, so she thinks it's one of like the older ladies that came into her store. She goes on this whole excursion to try and hunt down that woman, find the winning lottery ticket, and maybe possibly get some of the money. In order to find this woman, she has to team up with one of her classmates who is this super rich guy, has a really good computer hacking skills, so he's able to hack into the camera at her gas station, and that's what kind of starts their excursion together. And not only that, but our main character, her family has like huge financial struggles, and it's part of the reason why she's working at the gas station is to support her family. There is this more serious undertone of, you know, she actually really needs to find this ticket because there's all of these, there's this sort of financial situation that her family's in, and she, like, if she found this ticket, it would just fix everything for her. The boy in this book, Zan, he is kind of just in it for the fun, and is like, okay, yeah, let's go on this excursion, let's find this ticket. As they get closer to finding the ticket, things kind of, the pressure gets on, and she's like, no, this is really important to me, and it's just amazing and fantastic, and I read it in like 2 days. I really hope they adapt this to a movie. One, I would like to audition for the role of Rico Danger because I was able to relate to her so much, and it was one of those books where, yeah, I just saw myself in the main character, and that's what I think also really added to it being one of my favorite books this year. Okay, my next favorite book of this year is my absolute favorite young adult fantasy book, Serpent Dumb by Shelby Mahurin. Shout out to Shelby Mahurin. She is so sweet. She followed me on Instagram, you guys. I was flipping out. Super cool, and she just has this amazing aesthetic, and she knows how to bake, and she updates on her writing, and she's currently writing the second book in the series too, which is awesome. In this book, we are following our main character, who is a witch who is on the run. She left her witch coven, and you don't know why, but you know that she is basically in hiding from her witch coven. Something happened. She decides to go into the heart of witch hunter territory and basically kind of disguise herself as a normal person. Something ends up happening, and she ends up having to marry a witch hunter who does not know that she's a witch. So we have 2 people that are like mortal enemies having to marry each other that are totally unaware of each other's identities, except for our main character. she knows he's a witch hunter and stuff like that. So the book was heavily inspired by France, and there is like French in the book. Not that I know if it's correct because I don't speak French, but it's so wonderful. We have these two characters that are so opposite from each other. We have Reed, who is this witch hunter who's very rigid, who's very religious. It's very religion heavy. Everyone who's a witch hunter is very religious. And then we have Lou, who is just this very fun, outgoing witch who just, you know, wants to be free and doesn't fit into all the standards that Reed wants her to be, seeing that she's like his wife now. And because we have two very opposite characters, the dialogue in the book was hilarious. The arguments and their relationship and just seeing how they just constantly bump heads but then slowly kind of like get to know each other and fall in love a little bit, maybe, possibly, no spoilers. Okay, the next book on my list I lent to someone, so I don't physically have it to hold up to you, so I'm just gonna put up a picture here. The Silent Patient by Alex Michaelides. You guys, this was probably one of the best thriller books I have read this year. It had a mind-blowing ending. I was not able to predict anything that happened in this book. The Silent Patient is about this woman. She was a very, very famous painter, and she was married to a very famous photographer. Her relationship was kind of like the Angelina Jolie Brad Pitt relationship in that they were sort of a power couple. The world loved them. They were seen to be, or at least they looked as if they were in love with each other, until one day she came home and just shot and killed her husband. And after she did that, she went completely silent, didn't have any explanation to it. That is the premise of this book. In the story, we are following a criminal psychotherapist who is obsessed with her, like obsessed with the whole case. He ends up getting a job at the mental hospital that the wife is at, and he is determined to figure out what happened and to get her to talk. By the time you get to the end of the book, like, you think, like, I thought I kind of knew what was gonna happen. It ended up being just like this. In summary, The Silent Patient was fantastic. The next book on my list was an absolute mind trip, but in the best way possible. After Dark by Haruki Murakami. Now, Haruki Murakami is a very popular author in Japan. He's been writing books since the late 80s, early 90s, I believe. After Dark is one of his more recent books that was translated from Japanese. The synopsis of this book is all over the place. For anyone who's read Haruki Murakami, you know that he does not follow that traditional Western style of plotting, and that his books don't have a point. For example, most books, right, kind of follow a 3-act structure where there's, you know, some sort of problem, we're introduced to the characters, there's a conflict, there's rising action, there's a resolution, there's some sort of ending, right? In his books, it's very just a stream of thought where we're following a character that just does random stuff and there's no pattern to it, but it makes sense and it's beautiful and it's amazing. It's so unique, and Haruki's one of those authors that you're either gonna love or you're just gonna get frustrated with his books. Now for me, I am one of those people that just ended up falling in love. After Dark, the story opens up where there's this girl, it's about midnight or 1 in the morning, and she's sitting in a diner alone, and you don't know why she's there, but all of a sudden there's this guy that comes in and he says that he knows her sister, and then we get these sort of weird chapters to where we're flashing to her sister who is sleeping in this room, but it's told from the perspective of like a camera that's watching her. This is what I say when I mean the plot's all over the place, because you're probably like, what the heck? How does that, you're not making sense, Naya. Boy ends up going into the diner, meeting this girl, and is like, hey, I know your sister. She kind of vaguely remembers him. We're basically following these two characters throughout the span of one whole night. It's Tokyo, it's like 3 in the morning, and a lot of crazy stuff goes on. Also getting flashback chapters to the sister who's in this room sleeping, and you don't know why we get these weird chapters. Anyways, the story is insane, and it took me a while to kind of wrap my head around the idea of a story not having, you know, some sort of big plot line that we're following, because we're just following this girl throughout one night and all the events that take place during that night, and then it kind of concludes with the sun just coming up, and then that's the story. What's so wonderful about it is that it captures a moment in this girl's life, and that's all it is. It's just this moment, it's just this night. Love it or you'll hate it. I absolutely loved it, and I'm going to be reading 1QH4 next. That's like the next Haruki Murakami book that you guys recommended to me. Okay, the next book that is on my list, you guys already know. I feel like this is on everyone's favorites list from 2019, just because honestly, it's one of those books that just lives up to the hype, you guys. My next favorite book is The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I am putting this book on here because it made me cry. Basically, all these books brought out some very extreme emotion in me. So just know if it's on my favorite list, I either like laughed or cried or screamed or like did all of those emotions while reading that book. The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I'm just gonna briefly describe the synopsis because I'm sure you've heard of it before. This book is inspired by the whole 50s Hollywood starlet era. In this book, we're following a journalist who gets the once-in-a-lifetime chance to interview Evelyn Hugo, who was this very, very popular 50s Hollywood movie star. She was known for having married 7 times, so she had 7 husbands. Real story and the truth behind why she got married 7 times, no one really knows until the journalist in the story gets to sit down with her and, in Evelyn's own words, learn what actually happened. And it's so crazy. And again, it's one of those books that you're following Evelyn's whole life from when she's a teenager, before she even became famous and went to Hollywood, all the way until her very last marriage. Then on top of that, we have this overarching plot as to why Evelyn is only now coming forward and telling the truth about what actually happens. I find it really interesting to read stories from women who grew up in the 50s, because that was a period in which it's like you're either a housewife or nothing at all, you know, like that was that era. You know, women were very oppressed in that era. Beautiful and painful to read about the things that Evelyn had to do and she had to experience and just go through to get some, you know, to get any sort of success in her life and to have a successful career. It was so inspiring and beautiful and amazing, and I just loved it, just like everybody else. I know, I'm on that boat, but like, trust me, if you're not on that boat, just read this book and you will get on the boat. The next book on my list is Defy Me by Tahereh Mafi. If you don't know, Tahereh Mafi is one of my favorite authors of all time. The Shatter Me series is my absolute favorite series of all time. I've been reading it since I was 15 years old. Defy Me is the 5th book in the series, and we get one more book after this, and I'm not ready. We're gonna talk about it more in my 2020 video. I don't know what to say at this point. I've talked about it so much. Also, this is the 5th book in a series, so there's not really much I can say without spoiling the book. To tell you a little bit about the series, the very first book, we're following our main character Juliet, who is this girl who is in an asylum. She's been locked up for almost a full year. She's locked up because she has the ability to touch people and kill them. So that's kind of the premise of the story, but it's so much bigger than that. The reason why I love Tahereh Mafi so much is because her writing is it's almost poetic and beautiful, and she has these incredible character arcs, and the character that I just described in the first book is so different from the character in this 5th book, because she's gone on a journey, you guys. For anyone who's read the series, you know. I trust the author to write her characters the best way she thinks that she can write them, and to put them through whatever she wants to put them through, even if it makes me cry. Okay, the next book on my list I read like January 7th. It's another book that just crushed my soul. Also, this book is huge, so it like physically crushed my fingers while I was reading it. Speaking of the last books in series, Kingdom of Ash by Sarah J. Maas, the queen, the one and only. She has finally concluded the Throne of Glass series. Is this like what is this, the 7th book? I don't even know how many books. I'm gonna put the number of books in the series, but this is the very last book. It is just under 1,000 pages. I was bawling. Like when I tell you I was a mess. This is one of the longest book series that I've ever read, like read as the books came out. So as far as like the years I've been reading this series, it has been many years. With every book that came out, I was just more and more in love with the character. So this last book destroyed me. Like I can't even talk about it because it's gonna make me cry. Kingdom of Ash, the Throne of Glass series. Again, I can't tell you anything because it's the last book. In this book series, we're following Selena Sardothian, who is a trained assassin, and she ends up getting sent to the Endovier mines, so basically kind of put in jail. She has the chance to win her freedom by competing against other assassins to become like the king's assassin or so. I don't even remember because the plot is so far from that central plot at this point. By the time you get to the last book, there's magic in it. It is an epic fantasy. There are so many characters in this world. By the time you get to the last book, it's like we have one chapter per character. At least for me, I loved every single one of those characters, so the fact that we got an ending for each of them and that we see how everyone's story ties together, and I can't even describe. I'm struggling, can you tell? Sarah J. Maas, started writing this book series, I think, when she was like my age, when she was like 21, 22, and yeah, I think she's like in her 30s now, and she just had a child. She had a child right when she finished writing the last book, so like she ended this whole child of a series, and I've been along for the ride, and I just, yeah, it was one of the best, it is the best finale to a fantasy series that I have ever read. So yeah, Kingdom of Ash, amazing. Last but not least, I have the only classic book that I read this year. Even though my goal was to read classic books this year, I only read one, but at least it was amazing, right? The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde is officially my favorite classic writer. Also, again, this is the only classic book I read this year. Okay, Oscar Wilde's writing is one of a kind. Like, it's so clever and witty and funny, but also very classy and very just beautiful and lyrical, and he like plays with words in such a unique, just fun way. Like, he's like one of those authors that like I wish I could just have a conversation with him, because I know like we would become best friends and I would just learn so much from him, and like he would probably insult me but I wouldn't even know he was insulting me because he would do it so creatively and so slyly. This book is about this character here, Dorian Gray, who at the beginning of this book, he is described as being one of the most beautiful like men you've ever seen, like just beautiful. Following our main character, who's like this artist, and he walks into a party and he sees Dorian Gray for the first time, and he just immediately, Dorian Gray becomes his muse, and he just becomes obsessed with Dorian Gray, and he's like, I have to paint you, you have to let me paint you. The artist kind of puts this idea in Dorian's head that you know, he's so beautiful and he's so perfect because he's so youthful, right? He doesn't know much about the world yet, and so he's untainted by the world, and that's why he doesn't have lines on his face. He creates this perfect painting of Dorian, and then Dorian becomes obsessed with this painting of himself and almost jealous of the painting, because that image captures Dorian at his peak, at his youth, and it's forever gonna look like that. But Dorian, being human, he's gonna age, right? Dorian ends up making this sort of deal with the devil, and he becomes ageless, but then everything he does in his life ages the painting instead. As he gets older and as he, you know, kind of becomes more corrupt and starts to sin and do all these bad things, it's reflected on the image and not him. And so every, you know, few months he'll go and look at that painting, and it's just like become monstrous because Dorian's becoming this monster, really. That painting triggered something in him almost, triggered this self-awareness, and it just, oh my god, the story is amazing. I am not doing it justice in describing it. It was fantastic. I'm absolutely gonna read it again at some point, because it's one of those books that you just keep reading and you keep learning things that you didn't like see the first time. Those are all my favorite books of 2019. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I'm so excited for 2020. Like, the books that are coming out, we're gonna talk about those next, okay? Until next time, keep reading, and I will talk to you guys later. Bye!